Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for attending our session, which is our first session right now, which is called A Closer Look at Regional Advocacy. My name is Pona Tran, and I am the Operations and Finance Coordinator at Faunalytics. Every year, we try to highlight research studies that focus on different regions across the world, exploring different diverse countries and cultures in the process. We embark on this globetrotting for a few reasons. Firstly, animal protection is a truly global movement. And there are advocates and animals, of course, from every single context that you might imagine. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, there is inequity in the type of research studies that get funded and prioritized. As we spoke about last year in our research panel, historically, animal advocacy research has been concentrated in the US, Canada, Europe, and other rich and white regions. But thankfully, that is changing. Due in part to the researchers that we have with us today, we are seeing more studies being conducted across the world. We are so privileged to hear from the set of 5 researchers who are brilliantly examining their local contexts and looking to make change. First up is Lefteris Statharas, a researcher for Welfare Matters, who will talk about the state of animal farming in Southeast Asia.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for being here, and thanks to Faunalytics for having me in the symposium. My name is Lefteris, and I'm a researcher and data manager for Welfare Matters. Today, I will be presenting the findings of our research report in our effort to understand animal agriculture and farmed animal welfare in Southeast Asia. The presentation will be based on our report, which was released in July last year, and you can find at the Welfare Matters website. First of all, some numbers that you might be familiar with that show that Southeast Asia is one of the top 5 subregions with the highest number of farmed animals in the world. These numbers come from the FAO stats for the year 2022. For our report, we aim to do a landscape study and offer insights into the scale, distribution, and trends within the animal agriculture industry. We focused on the largest agriculture producers in the region, namely Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and Singapore. And these are the countries we are collectively calling the SEA 6. Singapore is a little bit of an exception, but it was considered because it's a high-income country in the region with a high dependence on imports for its food sources. So activities in the country are important. It's also important to note that for this research, we only looked at land animals and we did not look at aquatic animals at all. This research was 100% desktop-based, meaning that we didn't do any farm visits, but we just looked at the research papers, country and company reports, journalistic exposés and general media, and of course, for the statistics, we looked at the UN and FAO numbers. I can't go through all of the focus areas of our report, but for this presentation, we'll focus on 4 areas. Firstly, the statistics of farmland animals in SEA 6, the state of legislation for farmed animal protection, the overview of animal agriculture in each of these countries, and trade numbers for live animals and animal products. So let's start with the statistics. First, we see the number of chickens slaughtered in each of the SEA 6 countries in 2021 and 2022. The original report contains numbers from 2021, while the 2022 numbers I updated for this presentation. As you can see, the numbers are huge, and Indonesia is the country with the highest number of chickens slaughtered, followed by Thailand and the Philippines. With the exception of Malaysia and Vietnam, we don't see huge differences in the trends, in the numbers from 2021 to 2022. These numbers talk about chickens slaughtered in these countries in those years. These chickens might be broiler chickens, layer hens at the end of their cycle, or potentially sick birds that needed to be slaughtered. What is important to remember from this graph is that almost 96% of all animals slaughtered in the region are chickens, followed by ducks and pigs. Indeed, if we go and see the stats for other big farmed animal industries except chickens in the SEA 6 countries, we see that ducks are by far the second most farmed animal in the region, followed by swine, and then the ruminants, goats, sheep, and cattle. And specifically, more than 254 million ducks were raised and slaughtered in the region. However, during our work, we couldn't find a lot of information about their welfare and their overall conditions about how they're raised. It's something that Faunalytics also highlighted in their research earlier this year. Hopefully, as we talk more about ducks, we can see a little bit more attention towards their welfare in the region. Now, briefly, I'll talk a little bit about the legislation for farm animal protection in these countries. In the report, you can find this matrix that summarizes the laws present in each of the SEA6 countries for some of the key indicators for animal welfare. While I won't go into too much detail for this presentation, I wanted to emphasize that animal sentience is not explicitly recognized in any of those countries. In quick summary, the Philippines is the country that has the most specific terms and regulations for farmed animal protection. Thailand has significant regulations for recommended conditions in different production systems. Malaysia's laws are less strict, but at least there is a mention of enforcement policies, which is something that is generally lacking in the region. Singapore has limited information, which is probably due to its limited industry size. And Vietnam has seen some recent developments in animal protection, and it's likely to continue evolving. Next, we'll go through a brief overview of animal agriculture in the countries studied. But before we go into more details, I'd like to mention a problem we faced while trying to conduct our analysis. Since our work was based on the existing bibliography, we had very different sources of information for each country and for each farmed animal when we're trying to assess the size of the industry and the size of the farms. It was hard both to find estimations on those sizes, but also data from similar time periods. So as you see in this graph, we ended up with a varied range of data, and a large farm in Indonesia would be considered a medium scale in Malaysia and a small to medium in Thailand. So due to this, a direct comparison between countries and industries wasn't possible. Now, let's just go through a brief overview of the industry in each of the countries. In Indonesia, we see that it is the largest poultry producer in Southeast Asia. The government advocates for further intensification of small ruminant production and increased duck consumption, and there is a growing demand for dairy products in the country. When we go to Malaysia, the government is eager to expand and modernize the local broiler chicken industry and is offering subsidies to farmers. And initiatives have been implemented to increase dairy production within the country. In the Philippines, broiler chicken and pork industries are important. African swine flu currently has a huge impact in the pig industry, and there are some imported breeds of cattle in the country that are struggling in the climate. When we go to Singapore, we see that it's heavily reliant on imports for its food supply due to its limited local agriculture production. And the fourth egg farm was expected to start operation in 2024. However, it has seen some delays and it's expected to start operating in 2025. In Thailand, we see that it is the second biggest producer of poultry in Southeast Asia, and it is one of the world's largest poultry exporters. And lately, there has been a new bill being discussed to modernize pig farm. Vietnam has 1.6 times higher antimicrobial ingredient usage compared to European countries in its animal industry. It is the second largest pork producer in Asia behind China, and it is the second largest duck product producer in the world, again, behind China. Again, more detailed information about each of these industries in each of these countries can be found at the full report. Next, we'll have a brief overview of the trade directions in the region for both live animals and products. This graph shows the destinations of live animals being exported by the SEA6 countries. Singapore stands out as the top importer of live animals in the SEA6 region. Interestingly, our research revealed that Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, and Brunei also import a significant number of live animals, which was quite unexpected for us. This information is important for local advocates to consider when they're assessing transportation conditions for live animals. In this graph, we show the monetary value of imports and exports of live animals in the SEA6 countries. Overall, when it comes to net exports of each of the SEA6 countries, Malaysia and Thailand are the biggest exporting countries, which showcases the size of their animal agriculture industries. And in fact, when we continue to animal products and we go to Thailand, we see that the export of animal products from Thailand is nearly 4 times greater than the combined export of the rest of the ASEAN countries. And when we talk about animal products, we talk about meat products, milk, and eggs. I understand we went through a lot of information in a short amount of time, but these are the main conclusions we have from our research. First, broiler chickens are the most farmed animals in the region. Ducks are the second most farmed animal, with very little information known about their farming conditions. Malaysia and Thailand are the leading countries when it comes to live animal exports. We see that national policies might be conflicting with higher animal welfare asks in many of those countries. A lot of farming activities is still happening by smallholder farms in many countries, and it's not as centralized, monopolized as in other areas of the world. And lastly, there is a lack of uniformity in animal welfare standards across countries, which makes it a little bit difficult to enforce consistent welfare practices. And thank you very much for your attention. You can scan this QR code to access our full report, and I'll be very, very happy to answer any questions you might have.
And Lefteris, thank you so much for joining us on the panel. We have a few questions for you, and I will read out the first one. Is there any specific reason that India was not part of the study? They say that they export a lot to these neighboring countries, and their farmed animal population as well as feed exports are growing exponentially. Is there any data or insight on how India compares to the countries that you mentioned?
We didn't really look into India because as an organization, we're based in Singapore, Southeast Asia, and we just wanted to focus on the neighboring countries around Singapore. So having very little information when we started about all of our neighboring countries, we wanted to start small and just get more information as we go through. But yeah, definitely India is a country that has a lot of connections with Southeast Asia, but we haven't really started looking into that as well. So we leveraged some of our connections that we had in the Philippines, in Thailand, Indonesia. So we started with something that was there for us.
Great. I think we can squeeze one more question in.
Sure.
The biggest votes are, do you see any signs of emerging interest in the welfare of fishes or invertebrates like shrimps in Southeast Asia?
Fishes are something that we didn't really have a lot of information when we started. We wanted to include them, but then when we saw the vast range of information we needed to get, we couldn't do justice in the small amount of time we had for the research. But we have seen some organizations in Thailand, in the Philippines, slowly getting traction on fish welfare. Especially in shrimp as well. So we're hoping to see more work on that as well.
Okay, great. So we have a lot of questions for you, but I don't think we have time. So we're going to unfortunately move on.
Feel free to reach out on my LinkedIn.
Yes, absolutely, which is all in the chat. If you wanted to have a question, if you wanted to get your question answered by Lefteris live, you can go to the end of, at the end of the session, you can go to a link where you can be in a breakout room with all of the speakers from the session. Thank you so much. All right, and next up, we have Pallavi Krishnappa, the Executive Director at Consumers for Sustainability, who will speak about egg labeling practices in India.
Hi everyone, I'm Pallavi Krishnappa and I'm here today to present my research on the misleading labeling practices that are prevalent within the Indian egg industry. I'll begin with a brief overview of the industry, especially looking at the role of marketing in boosting its growth over the years. Over the last decade, egg production and consumption in India has seen rapid growth due to several factors such as rising incomes, urbanization, and the demand for animal products. There has also been a growing acceptance of the consumption of eggs by traditional vegetarians, and today India ranks second globally in hen shell egg production. But this wasn't always the case. So in 1981, the Indian poultry industry was facing a severe crisis. 40% of poultries had gone out of business due to high input costs and low profit margins, and the industry required an urgent intervention to turn its fortune around. This came in the form of a resoundingly successful campaign spearheaded by the National Egg Coordination Committee, or the NECC, uh, whose, whose goal was twofold. One was to promote the daily consumption of eggs in Indian households, and the other was to overcome the complex cultural and religious factors that surround egg consumption. Indian vegetarians traditionally consider eggs as an animal flesh product, and these campaigns worked at promoting eggs as a non-animal flesh product and as a multivitamin capsule, highlighting the health and nutritive benefits of eggs, calling it the best square meal in the world. And these campaigns targeted different target groups such as expecting mothers, children, and the elderly, and it worked in shifting vegetarian beliefs by positioning eggs as a daily essential that one can't do without. Another factor that was extremely crucial in the success of these campaigns was that the campaigns were made to look less like advertisements and more like public service announcements and a health advisory. And it worked because it brought about a significant shift in the dietary patterns of Indians, especially Indian vegetarians, and there was a rise in vegetarian diets. Today, while wholesale eggs still dominate the Indian market, the popularity of branded eggs is increasingly growing, especially in urban areas which have a higher per capita egg consumption due to the affordability and availability of poultry products within these areas. On a global scale, advancements in health, safety, and welfare standards, as well as increasing consumer awareness about the environment, animal welfare, and public health implications of egg production, are also factors which are reshaping the Indian egg industry today. As trends such as the transitioning to alternative housing systems, higher welfare standards such as cage-free and free-range um, housing systems are also trickling down into the Indian market. And as these trends are gaining momentum, Indian egg producers are also under pressure to adopt similar practices. But as the study shows, in, as the study shows, the lack of enforcement of existing labeling regulations as well as inadequate labeling regulations has led to the widespread use of deceptive marketing strategies of health washing, humane washing, and greenwashing to mislead consumers about the health, animal welfare, and environmental benefits of egg consumption and egg production. So why is this important? It's important because 99% of Indian eggs currently come from battery or colony cages. And there is also growing concern about the unregulated antibiotic use in the poultry industry, which have been linked to the spread of drug-resistant foodborne diseases, including Salmonella and E. coli. 74% of Indians currently consume eggs, and it is concerning because most egg packaging only highlights the health, nutritive, animal welfare, and environmental benefits of these products, with no disclosure of the adverse risks that come with egg production and egg consumption. And as egg and as consumer awareness about these aspects of egg production are growing, the marketing efforts of the Indian egg industry have been to put consumer concerns at ease through misleading claims on their packaging and other mediums of advertisement, as the study shows. The study looked at branded eggs sold in major hyperlocal and brand e-commerce sites across 33 locations in India to capture both local and national egg brands. 270 products from 96 brands were initially identified and analyzed against the existing labeling regulations to filter out those without misleading claims. The final list had 154 variants across 57 brands. The claims were divided on the basis of their positioning on the packaging, such as those on the front of packaging versus those on the back of packaging, and they were categorized into health, nutrition, and production claims. These were further analyzed for the use of deceptive marketing strategies of health washing, humane washing, and greenwashing to influence consumer behavior. Under health washing, which was the most prominent strategy, health and nutrition claims were the largest category. Most health claims were prominently displayed on the front of packaging, making them the first information consumers see at the time of purchase. There were two prominent tactics at play, which were used to health wash consumers. The first was to make nutrient comparative claims with no substantiation. For example, saying that a particular egg product has more vitamin A or the highest protein, but providing no information on what the product was being compared to, was misleading and went against the regulatory conditions and declarations that are necessary to make such comparative claims. More worryingly was the promotion of egg consumption daily without a mention of its adverse health risks, especially for at-risk populations such as heart patients. Targeted variants at heart patients claim to be low cholesterol and good for cardiac patients, but these packaging would often omit mentioning cholesterol values in its nutrition information table. Under humane washing, labels such as pasture-raised and country and housing system claims like free-range and cage-free were common. However, India has no clear definitions or regulations surrounding these claims, especially housing system claims such as free-range and cage-free. Similarly, claims of there being happy and healthy hens or the provision of veterinary care were equally unreliable as there were no clear definitions or regulations for it. Instead, these terms are often employed as marketing strategies to appeal to ethical consumers. And this creates a misleading image of higher welfare standards, which may or may not reflect the reality of the production practices at play, since there is no method to substantiate it or verify it. Another interesting thing was the popularity of what are called vegetarian eggs. These eggs are promoted as vegetarian friendly because the hens are provided vegetarian feed. And this is considered healthier. However, promoting a strictly vegetarian diet for hens contradicts their natural dietary habits as omnivorous animals. There was also the popular use of the term infertile eggs to position eggs again as suitable for vegetarian diets. The claim works to emphasize the absence of animal flesh. However, it's inherently misleading because eggs intended for consumption are always infertile, and labeling eggs as infertile creates a false sense of differentiation, leading consumers to believe that they're purchasing a product with unique qualities or added ethical benefits, which is not the case. While greenwashing claims were not as prominent in egg packaging, unlike the dairy sector where greenwashing claims are a rising trend, this could be attributed possibly to the growing awareness of the environmental impacts of dairy production versus lower awareness of the environmental impacts of poultry production. However, emerging tactics with claims such as pollution-free were observed in one major brand across all of its variants. And similarly, non-standardized labels such as cage-free, free-range, and pasture-raised also contribute to greenwashing by giving consumers the impression that these hens are raised in open, natural environments that are chemical-free, less crowded, and therefore less polluting. So what can we as advocates do to fight the narrative and misinformation that the animal agriculture industry promotes, especially on its products? One is to counter industry narratives, which is to, as advocates, stay aware of and proactive in challenging the rapidly evolving animal agriculture industry's narratives, particularly looking at the interlinkages between humane, health, and environmental claims. There is also a need to advocate for clear and transparent labeling practices, such as including eco-labeling and health labels to help consumers make more informed choices and counter misleading claims. As advocates, we must familiarize ourselves with our national advertising and labeling regulations to better support consumer rights. Another strategy that one can employ is to actively file complaints against misleading advertising of animal-sourced foods. And there is also a need for further research on consumer practices and perceptions around the health, ethical, and environmental implications of egg consumption, and to investigate how these perceptions influence purchasing decisions, especially in countries like India. There's also a need for India-specific research on public health risks associated with egg production and how to reduce them. Thank you, and you can read the full report in the link provided here. Please feel free to reach out to me on the email address provided below, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Pallavi. Thank you so much for joining us here on our panel. I don't see any questions from the audience, so while you're thinking of one, I guess I'll ask one of my own. So, has it always been the case in India where people were concerned about welfare, or is this a new sort of emerging trend?
I think the answer to that is complicated. We have a very complicated relationship to how we view animals in India, where we both treat them as religious entities, especially cows, and we think that we are treating them well. So in the sense that animal welfare is often connected to religious standards of how animals should be treated. However, I think as a movement, it is definitely a nascent movement right now. It's not as advanced as it is globally, and I would say that it's been maybe 2 decades in the making, the concerns about animal welfare and movement in general. So yeah, I think that should answer your question.
Interesting, thank you. I do see one question now. Have there been any successful campaigns to combat humane and greenwashing and other misinformation? What would it take to reverse the misinformation that the public consumes?
Yeah, so recently, actually, the Food Regulatory Authority came out with an advisory against the misleading health claims for A2 and A1 and A2 milk products, which is products that come from indigenous cows. And a lot of these producers say that this particular milk from indigenous cows has special health benefits. So the food regulatory body did crack down on these claims and said that these were misleading health claims. So there are certain things. One of the ways to go about it is to keep yourself informed of the constantly changing narratives of the animal agriculture industry. And there are it's sometimes it can just feel like a slap on the wrist for the industry, but it is still something that can be leveraged. So, for example, the advisory that was issued was later retracted because there is, of course, some resistance from the dairy industry. However, this can still be leveraged to raise consumer awareness about it, because once that information is made public that these are misleading health claims, it is still a tool that advocates can use to then speak to consumers and say that, hey, this government body has also recognized at one point that these are misleading health claims. So I think the strategies are to keep yourself informed of what kinds of misleading labels and claims are being put out by the industries, and to just either file consumer complaints or to write to your government bodies to combat these.
Great, thank you. There are a couple of more questions, but unfortunately we have run out of time. If you would like to continue this discussion, please wait until the end of the session, where you can go out into a breakout room with all of the speakers in the session. You can also ask Pallavi a question in the contact information that we've posted in the chat. Thank you so much. And next up, we have Gülbike Mirzaoğlu and Fatma Sweda Evirgan, two economists and the two co-founders of Animetrics, who will present on the plant-based cheese labeling in Turkey.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. We are honored to present our work at Fauna Connections. My name is Gülbike, and this is my colleague, Fatma Sweda Evirgan. Together, we co-founded Animetrics, and today we would like to discuss our original study titled Evaluating Consumer Confusion, the case of labeling restrictions on plant-based cheese in Turkey. This study is co-authored by our colleague Gizem, and we hope our insights will be useful for your advocacy efforts. So in a nutshell, our organization, Animatrix, is a new organization, and we are focused on advancing animal advocacy through research and capacity building services. We apply economics and econometrics to create actionable insights for the movement, and we use experiments, methodologies that identify cause and effect relationships, and policy evaluations. I have a PhD in economics, and Statharas is currently doing her PhD in economics, and our co-author Gizem Kurt has PhD and postdoc in business administration. So what's the problem? Why did we start this research? As you might know, we are facing a critical issue around the world regarding bans on terms like cheese and meat for plant-based products in many countries, for example, South Africa, France, Turkey, United States. And these bans in generally claim that they are preventing consumer confusion, but actually there's no evidence to support it. And in fact, removing these familiar terms can create more confusion than before, and of course, it's bad for the plant-based industry's growth. And actually, when we look at the behind the bans, we see that most studies show that these terms actually don't confuse the consumers, and yeah, actually removing these can increase the confusion more. But the problem is there are only very few research conducted in this topic, and they're mostly focused on the United States, and they also have significant methodological limitations. And what we can say is that if consumers are really confused, like currently the use of vegan labels like V-label can help decreasing this confusion, but their effectiveness in this is not being researched yet, to the best of our knowledge. So in this study, we are asking 4 key questions. First is, how do naming and labeling these products affect consumers' confusion about plant-based cheese? And second is, can people accurately assess how others are confused about these products? Third is, how do naming and labeling influence views on healthiness and nutrition value of these products? And fourth is that, do naming and labeling affect how plant-based products are perceived compared to animal-based cheese? And we are focusing on Turkey because recently there has been strict laws that makes it illegal to use the terms like cheese for plant-based products. And that's why producers had come up with creative names like cashew block or white slices, etc. So we will do an online experiment with around 2,500 people, and we will compare how using cheese terminology and presence of V-label affects how consumers are confused. And we will use regular animal-based cheese as baseline for comparison. Currently, we are in the data collection phase, and hopefully, we will collect data and we will analyze the results soon. And and our contribution that we aim to make in this work is that this will be the first study on this topic outside of the United States, and Turkey is a key market in Middle East and North Africa. So it's important to know the insights here. We are building up on previous methodologies, and we are improving the methodologies with larger sample size and some other methodologies that will decrease the biases. And we are also examining how V-label can influence perceptions with and without the term cheese. So this also will be the first study on this. And also we are exploring how people perceive other people's confusion versus their own confusion.
All right, now
So that will continue.
Yeah, thank you. Now the methodology part. So we started off by having long conversations with local activists, and we created 5 different visuals with different products to test the effects that we are after. So we first wanted to include white cheese. It's the most commonly consumed cheese product in Turkey. So the reason why we include this is that people may be confused about like the traditional animal-based cheese as well. Like they might not be able to know the product content very well, etc. And then we developed 4 other visuals. And we used terminology that was commonly used after the ban was introduced, basically. So we have the cheese terms of plant-based white cheese, and then we have another version of it with the V label included. And then we have another product when this cheese term is removed, it's called plant-based white block. So this block terminology was used quite commonly by plant-based products after the ban was introduced. And then again, we have another version of it with the V label included. So what we do is we get 2,500 participants and we randomly assign them to one of these 5 products. And everybody sees their assigned product and then they're asked to answer a series of questions. So what do we ask them? Again, our main question is about confusion rates, right? So we ask them, first of all, a series of true-false questions about product origin and content. So like this product does not contain lactose, true or false. And we look at them, we look at the number of correct answers in these true and false questions. And then we also ask them about product functionality, as they may get confused, for example, about what to do with a product called white block, right? And then the novel part of our study is that we ask them, okay, can you now please estimate the percentage of other participants in the study who who gave correct answers to all the true-false questions, or who know the functionality of the product. And then the idea here is that maybe they know what the product is, like they understand the product, but they think that the other people in Turkey don't really get it. But maybe there's some inaccuracy there in the sense that maybe they think that people don't understand, but when we look at the actual and estimated values, there's a difference and the actual value is higher than expected, or maybe vice versa, right? So we wanted to understand if there's some distorted beliefs in that sense. And then we ask them a series of questions about perception. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. These are very classic scale questions about product perceptions, like about ingredients, safety, and taste. And also to the people who see only the plant-based products, we ask them how similar they think this product is to animal-based cheese in terms of like sensory attributes, price, or the environmental impact. And after that, we collect a whole bunch of other information about plant-based understanding, and the consumers' like lifestyle insights, or like their health habits, taste perceptions, or how often they read labels. And also we collect their demographic information, etc. So what we do is we compare the confusion rates and product perceptions among all these 5 products. And we also look at the differences between the real confusion rates and the estimated confusion rates to see if there's a bias going on there in terms of beliefs. And then, we also compare the plant-based products in terms of how consumers think they're similar to animal-based cheese. And then additionally, we want to understand whether or not the effect of these labeling and cheese usage, like whether or not this effect changes from consumer type to consumer type. And like we'll come up with different consumer characteristics by using the additional data that we collected about the individuals. And so our goal with the study is to provide actionable insights to the plant-based food industry and also animal advocates in Turkey, and also in similar markets, especially in like Middle East and North Africa. So we will do so by empowering activists with like empirical evidence to challenge these restrictions effectively. And we are also hoping to raise awareness in the plant-based food industry about how naming and labeling choices affect confusions, perceptions, and confusion. And finally, we inform policymakers to develop effective regulations so that they can actually come up with regulations that minimize consumer confusion. So what's next is we will finalize our data collection quite soon. and then we'll analyze our big data, and then we'll come up with a white paper, and then we also we will be submitting to academic journals and hopefully have a academic publication. And a potential next phase is gonna be hopefully conducted in South Africa. So yeah, we're very excited to hear about your feedback and all questions that you might have. And if you don't get a chance to ask your questions or give us your feedback today, please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. So on the panel right now, we have with us Gülbike and Fatma for questions. I don't see any in the chat right now, but I was actually curious, from the time that you conducted the study and recorded the presentation, have there been any updates in your next steps?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so what has been happened is after the presentation is that we have applied for ethics committee for ethics approval, and we're still pending for that. It's still pending, and other than that, yeah, we are waiting for the approval for start of the data collection phase.
Great, thank you so much. Okay. You have a question, please put it in the Q&A. I see one right now. The question is, can this data be extrapolated to understand what kind of labeling can encourage more people to try and stick to vegan alternatives?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for the question. So in our analysis, we also include some questions with regards to willingness to try. Like we ask these questions. I mean, it's hypothetical, right? But we ask the participants whether or not they would like to pay for this product, buy this product, try this product, or pay as much as they would pay for animal-based cheese, etc. With regards to sticking to plant-based alternatives, I think that's a very interesting, but another research question that requires like a study with some follow-up waves. But yeah, with the current one, we will try to answer how these different labeling choices affect the willingness to try, at least like in a hypothetical sense.
All right, thank you. And one more that has a couple of votes. Are you planning to measure the effect of banning the use of terms like cheese in sales of plant-based products?
Actually, that was an interesting question for us as well. We were planning to measure the substitution effects from the experiment we are conducting, but like currently we had limited budgets. And then we tried to keep the survey as short as possible. So that's why we decided to postpone this. But yeah, maybe in the future we can look into that in a different study. But yeah, for now we will keep this as it is.
Great. Okay, that is all the time we have for this Q&A session. If you want to continue the discussion, please wait until the very end of the session, where you can go into a breakout room with all of the speakers from this session. Thank you so much. The next speaker in this session is Taylor Waters, an animal attorney who will speak on utilizing public records requests to benefit animals in the US Midwest.
Hi everyone, my name is Taylor Waters. I am the staff attorney at the Vermont Law and Graduate School's Animal Law and Policy Institute, as well as the program lead for AVA Summits and AVA International. So we're going to talk about something today that I'm really passionate about. It's data and a study that I am still working on because we have so much data, and how it can be applicable across other professions within the movement and applicable to other jurisdictions. So to start, I wanted to get a really clear view of what animal cruelty was in the Midwest, specifically Ohio, because Ohio is a weird jurisdiction. It has large swaths of agricultural land, but it also has very large city centers and very large urban settings. So I wanted to take a look at what kinds of animal cruelty existed, what's being done about the different kinds of animal cruelty in the state, and get a picture of how it overlaps with other kinds of exploitation and economies. So I took a top-down approach. I looked at the federal government first. I thought, what do I want from the federal government, and am I willing to wait many years to get it? If anybody's done Freedom of Information Act requests, FOIA requests, they take a long time to come in, especially when you're asking for help from APHIS, the body of the government that most animal requests go to. So I wanted from the federal government information on inspection reports from slaughterhouses and the research facilities in the state of Ohio. Ohio has a ton of animal agriculture. It has a ton of factory farms, and it has publicly funded via state universities weird meat research centers. I say weird because it freaks me out. They have experiments that they run on cows and other farmed animals to produce more and see the stress that they can actually inflict on their bodies, the limits of that. So it's pretty horrific. I wanted to get those inspection reports, but also for exhibitors in the state. Ohio has a lot of roadside zoos and it has a lot of wildlife trafficking. So I wanted to see what those licenses were looking at, what those inspection reports looked at. Next, I went to the state level and I looked at what information I would want from the state. Luckily, Ohio has a pretty robust series of sunshine laws that allow both open meetings and public records requests. So from the Attorney General's office, I requested consumer protection reports that went into reports that ordinary citizens, consumers had made to the Attorney General's about things that are wrong. Strictly from a transactional perspective, but there's so much overlap with animals that it's really effective to find patterns of animal cruelty that are technically legal. So a lot of what we found had to do with puppy mills, the free sale of animals in stores, and veterinarians who may have been doing intentional hiding or bad work. So that's what we asked for from the Attorney General's office. And then Ohio has a really strange law, for better or worse, that allows for the private prosecution of animal cruelty. It allows humane societies to deputize lawyers and have them prosecute animal cruelty when it's a misdemeanor. So I wanted to send out public records requests to every humane society in the state. Is very ambitious of me, and get a feel for what was being investigated, what was being charged, and what the outcomes were. That way we could see whether some jurisdictions weren't investigating things properly, who was making these initial reports, whether they were mandatory reporters, because I kind of wanted to see whether mandatory reporters were mandatorily reporting, and whether there's a resource issue. So if there is a county or jurisdiction that really wants to prosecute animal cruelty, but they can't for whatever reason, I wanted to find that as well. And so results started rolling in. There was a lot. And I really wanted to do a comprehensive perspective that brought in animals that have been historically rejected and ignored under normal animal cruelty conversations. So farmed animals and research animals as well. And what I found was a lot, honestly. So we were able to get all of the general information on animal cruelty, which led to really interesting qualitative data that we were allowed to make narratives on. So that was a horrible sentence. So what I mean by that is we could take this data, look at it, and find the humanity in it and find the story to tell. So for example, from animal cruelty, we were able to find that all of the large dog fighting busts that occurred were always paired with a drug bust and or human trafficking bust. So dogfighting exists as this economy of illegal activity that is paired with other extremely exploitative and cruel kinds of activity. So we were able to make that connection. For, I'm still waiting on the FOIAs, which should not surprise anybody. For the consumer reporting, we were able to find this direct prevalence of Amish puppy mills out in agricultural centers, providing dogs to cruel puppy mill brokers in the more urban centers, who were then either selling them directly to people and misleading them, or to Petland and that kind of a pet shop. And so we slowly combed through these results, getting ready to tell the story, finding the story that we really wanted to tell, and finding what it all means. So we looked at and found several interesting socioeconomic factors that led to animal cruelty. We were not able to prove the hypothesis that there is additional animal cruelty and domestic violence in jurisdictions with slaughterhouses. That did not show in the results, even with controlled counties that didn't have a slaughterhouse. And we were able to find region-specific issues. So if there was, for example, one county that had a lot of Amish puppy mills and was also not investigating animal cruelty, we were able to say, is this a resource issue, or do you not want to investigate these puppy mills? Is it a resource issue or an interest issue? And as I mentioned a minute ago, the economies of cruelty. And so I have all this data, and it's really cool, and it's telling this great story. And now, what am I going to do with it? So I got the idea, and my poor husband supporting this, as well as research assistants that I have, to create a data map. So we're working to create a robust interactive map that you can go to with filters so you can visually and interactively find animal cruelty as it overlaps with other kinds of exploitation in the state and the qualitative findings that we had. And so I really think that this has an interdisciplinary and an application in animal advocacy beyond just the law. Law and policy is really obvious. The more information you have on how the law is failing, specifically what I was looking at, but it doesn't need to be what others look at. You can make really direct and precise policy arguments. You can get right in there with what the problem really is, the objective findings that prove it, and make really great policy arguments. But there's also applications beyond that. There's applications in investigation work, because now you know where some bad offenders may exist. There's applications for media, because you can tell a story with the data that you find. Beyond that, I think at the start of every program or every objective goal push from an organization, you can have this moment where you ask yourself, what information do I need? Does any of this come from the government? And how does it tell the story we're trying to tell? Because that's what it's all about. Yeah, we want to save the most animals. We want to have the most effective advocacy that we can. But sometimes the buy-in from people who are not looking at things from our perspective can be, well, tell me the story. Tell me why I should care about this. And that is really where this data and qualitative analysis comes in, because it gives you the hard facts to back up your case, but it also can tell the story of why it matters to people who maybe don't initially care. And so there's a lot of overlap here across jurisdictions as well. You can take this model and email me, I'll tell you more about it, obviously, and take it truly anywhere, and it will help you find culturally relevant solutions. So what works in Ohio is not going to work everywhere. It's Ohio, right? But you can, by doing this where you are, you can find similar patterns of cruelty, cruel economies across different cultures and regions, and find really specific, culturally appropriate solutions to those problems. And the narratives will be different. You can have collaborative approaches by working with others on these really big issues and motivate and inspire and share, because when you can share these and people know that there's a similar issue happening somewhere else, you can resource allocate and combine and pool, which leads us to funding accessibility. Sometimes funders really like the direct, this is the problem, this is how I found it, here's the solution, and here's how much money I need to get there. So there's the funding advantage as well. So please take public records requests with you as another tool in your toolkit, and I can't wait to answer your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you for joining us on the panel today. We have a question here. How do we find out what other states can deputize human societies for investigation?
So a really good resource for finding that would be the Animal Legal and Historical Center. They have kind of a compendium of all the animal laws across the US, at least. I only know for the US specifically. I will say I've had a lot of conversations with David Rosengart, who's the criminal justice managing attorney at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. And it doesn't seem like it's common anywhere else. And one thing that I worry about with that regime, going a bit beyond the question, I have a hypothesis that the attorney who does most of that here in Ohio is keeping cases as misdemeanors when they should be felonies, because he would lose that stream of revenue. So there's kind of a dark side to it as well.
Great. And we have another question here. What can we learn from actions in Western societies, such as organizations like DXE and their efforts to conduct open rescues? It seems like legal systems are prosecuting animal activists more than the ones inflicting the cruelty. So what can we learn from those types of actions and apply to countries like India? And what should we take and what should we change to protect animals better from the rights-based approach instead of focusing just on better welfare standards?
That's a really good question. And I'm actually working on some programming for a good cop, bad cop talk on this for Asia Farm Animal Day. So it's kind of related to that. And it's such a culturally important question because I'm always hesitant to give legal advice outside my realm, but in different places where the police may react to things differently, or when there could be harsher consequences beyond what we realize initially. So I would say what we should take from the amazing work that DXE and other open rescues do is sometimes it works. Honestly, sometimes you take a swing and a leap and it really works out for you legally. Other times you spend 10 to 15 years in jail. So I think one of the things that worked really well in the open rescue cases that were recently acquitted in Utah was that the attorneys for the state took the step of calling the piglets dented cans. I think that spoke to the jury in a horrific way. I think the jury looked at baby piglets that were suffering and about to die, and then looked at the attorneys that called those piglets dented cans, and were never going to vote on the side of those attorneys. And that's one of the reasons that narrative descriptions and making animals, not anthropomorphizing them beyond what's logical, but telling their story in a way that really speaks to common people is important.
Really interesting example, but good example. Thank you. And can you say more about cases not being prosecuted because of resources versus interest? Did you or will you ask directly and hope to get a straight answer?
Yes, and so I uncovered a county that was doing something really confusing to me. They were collecting 12 to 13 dogs in a go for cruelty investigation, and then keeping the dogs, dismissing the charges after the person who was abusing them failed to appear, posting a fee for $20, and then letting it go. So that told me that they either can't accommodate all of the, it was a puppy mill situation, candidly. Or what are they doing with the dogs? Why are they keeping all of these after they seize them and then adopting them out instead of actually pursuing cruelty? Because we looked and it was a repeat offender situation. And it turned out that the county did not want to get involved in the Amish politics and making the Amish appear to be bad people because it was a significant source of revenue. And so that was a cultural component that we really had to learn about, of rural counties not wanting to make the Amish populations look like villains because they bring in so much money. So it was both. It was a resource issue and an interest issue. And they were very candid with me when I had that discussion.
Thanks so much. Well, coincidentally, that's all the time we have, and those were all the questions. If you think of any further questions, please wait until the end of the session where you can go into a breakout room with all of the speakers from the session. Thanks so much. The last speaker in the first session's agenda is Diego Exposito, PhD student at the University of Sheffield, who will enlighten us about ways to benefit urban animals in the European Union.
Hi everyone, thanks a lot for your time. I'm going to present today the preliminary findings of a report I'm writing along with colleagues at Eurogroup for Animals on coexistence with urban animals in the EU. It's worth saying that this is an ongoing project, which means that I won't be able to share the full or the complete details of the report, but I invite you to keep an eye out on the channels of Eurogroup for Animals, or to send me an email if you want more details on this project. Okay, so this is the structure of today's presentation. I will start by introducing the topic and providing a definition of what we mean by conflicts with urban animals. I will then discuss a classification of conflicts and give some examples, and then I will provide some recommendations for advocates. Okay, so first of all, conflicts with urban animals. So conflicts with urban animals are happening in most cities around the world. And these conflicts are growing due to, among other things, climate change and the expansion of urban areas. We are defining these conflicts as situations in which humans and urban animals have important and incompatible interests, leading to detrimental outcomes for both parties. And we think that the definition is important. So we spent some time thinking about how to classify conflicts, and the way in which I'm going to classify them today, it's probably not the way in which they will be classified in the report, but just for the sake of clarity, today I will classify them according to the impact that these conflicts have on humans. This is admittedly arbitrary, but it's for the sake of clarity. And it's worth noting that no conflict will fit only in one category, and that the same species can create different conflicts in different cities. So I'll discuss each of them in turn. So conflicts with an economic impact are those that basically cost us money. And a good example of this, because it happens in most cities, is the cost of cleaning bird droppings, and especially pigeon droppings. So pigeon droppings are acidic and they corrode infrastructure, and the cost of cleaning it is significant. There are some details there in the slides on the costs of cleaning infrastructure. The result of this, in most cases, is that councils implement programs of population control using lethal methods that cause, of course, the death, but also the suffering of these pigeons. And we think this is very problematic. Then there are conflicts with health impact or a safety impact or a perceived health and safety impact. And an example of this is the threat of disease transmission that is often used by decision makers to, again, implement programs of population control that use poison and traps and so on. And while it is true that some of these urban animals can transmit diseases, the risk in the case of at least pigeons and rats is very minimal. There's again some details in the on slides, but again, this is used by councils to use poison and traps, and we think this is that is regrettable. And then there are conflicts with a value impact, and these are conflicts that don't have a significant impact on human economy or on human health or safety, but that clash with human values. An example of this happens when animals come into cities and they are seen as alien to it. This is often the case with wild boars, and again, they are often killed because of this value impact. So the relevant thing now is what can animal advocates do? And first of all, we think that it's very important to have a protocol to guide decision making in cases where political actors want to implement a program of population control or to solve a conflict. And I think that this protocol must include the idea that lethal methods should only be used if population control or population management is really necessary, if there is no alternative, and if these lethal methods are proven to be effective, because often it happens that lethal methods are not effective in solving the conflict, and the political authority has just both harmed and killed animals, wasted resources, and not solved the problem. It's probably worth saying that for many of the conflicts that I have discussed, there are solutions in place, or solutions are being developed. And an example of this is the way in which the Barcelona City Council is managing pigeon populations. They are using an oral contraceptive that has reduced the number of pigeons in 55% in 3 years. That doesn't seem to have side effects, that doesn't seem to affect non-targeted species, and that is cheaper in the long term. There are other solutions, such as dove coats and or appropriate waste management that can solve the conflicts. But we think that it is worth proposing 3 background recommendations that would enable the development of solutions. And one of them is doing outreach on the capacity to suffer of urban animals and their moral consideration. This is something that some of our member organizations are doing, and that is very likely to increase tolerance and to mitigate these conflicts, or at least some of the conflicts. Something else that can be done is to call for funding to research solutions. So political institutions and funding bodies could have dedicated funds towards research of coexistence and mitigating conflicts. So, for example, the Horizon Europe program has dedicated funds for nature and biodiversity, for climate change adaptation, and we think it could have funds towards research on coexistence with urban animals. And then we think it's crucial to create and to foster networks of information and collaboration between political actors that are affected by these conflicts. So these are things like platforms of councils that can share information, things like supranational institutions sharing information on best practices. This can be done, for example, by the European Commission. And animal welfare organizations can research and share valuable resources on alternatives and possible campaigns. So we think that these 3 background recommendations could lead to a situation in which no animals are killed when a conflict happens with them. And we like to think that these 3 background recommendations would lead to a situation similar to when we have a conflict with a human neighbor. So in these cases, a solution must be found to the problem. The solution may not be entirely beneficial for both parties, but this solution cannot entail making our neighbors suffer or die. That was it. Thanks a lot. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Hi, Diego. Thank you for joining us in our panel. We have a few questions that rolled in while you were, well, past you was speaking. What is the status of contraception for rats, pigeons, etc.? I'm not sure what they mean by status, but if you could interpret that your own way, it'd be great.
Yeah, thank you. So it's different for different species, and I think what is relevant is that contraceptives need to be approved by relevant authorities. So even if the contraceptives are developed and are proven to work, they need to be approved by political actors in order to be implemented. So in the case of pigeons, there is a contraceptive that is being used by many cities that is approved. I think in Spain, in Belgium, in Italy, and I think in some other European countries, there is it has different names in different countries, but the active chemical is nicarbazine, and it works. And many cities are using it with good results. Then for rats, as far as I know, there's one that is contrabest that is being tested in several US cities. I think it's not approved. The problem it has is that some people have flagged that it has negative welfare implications for the rats. But others are being developed. And for other animals, such as boars, deer, and even squirrels, they are being developed. So they are in the process of research and test. But they are not ready yet. So that's more or less the status.
Great, thank you. Next question is, how would you classify conflict with free-ranging cats in urban areas? What possible solutions would you recommend?
Right. So cats and dogs, even, I think it's an interesting example and a bit different than other animal species such as rats or pigeons or foxes, for example. And the reason is that these animals are often kept as pets, and the reason that they are free roaming animals is that they either have been abandoned or that someone has let their their companions outside without having sterilized them, so they have reproduced. So I think it seems to me that the solution in this case must be different, and it has to involve, well, first of all, of course, not abandoning your companion animals. Then, if your animals are going to leave your house, making sure they're sterilized so that they don't reproduce and end up literally suffering or dying on the streets. And then, of course, funding shelters so that they can take care of them and find them a home.
Great answer. Thank you so much. We have a third question, but it's again about dogs. So if you wanted to continue the discussion about dogs, you could catch Diego later. But that's all the time we have for this session. Thank you so much. For continued discussions, like I said, there will be a link in the chat inviting you to a breakout room called A Closer Look at Regional Advocacy. It's actually being held in a Google meeting, not a Zoom. So the link will take you to a Google meeting. That'll be fine. The previous 5 speakers and Ignacio will all be there. If you wanted to ask a question, didn't have a chance, thought about one suddenly and didn't have a chance, please go into the breakout room now. Otherwise, the next session, Advocating for Small-Bodied Animals, will start at 1:50, that's 1:50 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you.